Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razum Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday proposed a new initiative to create a safe and secure maritime domain in the Indo-Pacific, indicating India's readiness to play a bigger role in the region where China has been expanding its military assertiveness. Prime Minister Modi floated the idea of the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative during his address at the 14th East Asia Summit, a premier forum in the Asia-Pacific region dealing with issues relating to security and defense. Apart from the 10 ASEAN member states, East Asia Summit includes India, China, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, New Zealand, United States and Russia. The ASEAN's current chair, Thailand and Australia, welcomed the Prime Minister's proposal, reflecting growing congruence of interests in the region. Senior officials of the Quad countries also held consultations on Monday on the situation in the Indo-Pacific. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the new initiative to secure the maritime domain in the Indo-Pacific. Joining me on the program today are Commander Abhijit Singh, retired, Head, Maritime Policy Initiative, Observer Research Foundation; Ashok Sajjanhar, former Ambassador; and KV Prasad, Senior Associate Editor of The Tribune. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. KV Prasad, let me begin the program with you. What has prompted the Prime Minister to coin and come up with this new initiative as far as the Indo-Pacific Oceans are concerned?
I think I'll look at it in conjecture with what he said at the Shangri-La dialogue, where India's vision of Indo-Pacific was spelled clear and which looked at the centrality of ASEAN. This, I think, is an incremental step if you look at it, because from there we are now talking of an initiative in that region. And remember, this is happening at a time when Indo-Pacific construct it's not very clear as to what the construct means all about. Is it a military construct or is it an economic construct? How does it take shape? I think different countries are different. The very fact Indo-Pacific for India means from our shores, from the Pacific shores right up to Africa. Whereas if you look at the American concept, it is Bollywood to Hollywood. So you see, there has differences of how you what the area of convergence is, how people are looking at it. I think different countries are coming up with their own versions. Perhaps if you look at, that's why the ASEAN, when they adapted that outlook for Indo-Pacific, and the Prime Minister did make it that it converges with the Indian outlook. So I think that's where it stands. This takes it forward. And there are specific areas which are spelled out when we heard the Secretary brief yesterday in Bangkok.
All right. So that having been said, Ambassador, what shape do you see this initiative taking?
Yes, the way I look at it, Frank, is that in essence, it represents the actualization and operationalization of the Indo-Pacific. We've been talking about the Indo-Pacific since
quite some time now, yeah.
Since November 2017. I don't speak about when it was initially launched by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe when he came here in 2007, etc. But in recent times, we've been speaking about it, and there's been a great deal of focus and emphasis on discussion. And as Mr. KV Prasad said, Prime Minister Modi had articulated our own vision of the Indo-Pacific at the Shangri-La dialogue last year in June in Singapore. I think this is taking it forward, because what we've always maintained, 2 or 3 basic concepts. One is the central position of the ASEAN, and I think that has been so that we want to give them comfort, space, that their role is not going to be diluted in any way. Then in terms of ensuring that there's freedom of navigation, ensuring there's freedom of overflights, that all disputes are resolved as per international conventions, particularly as far as the UN Convention on Law of the Seas is concerned, have a free, open, inclusive and prosperous. Inclusive basically to say that going forward, China could also be a member. So in that sense, not be an aggressive sort of a concept. And he said that very clearly also in Shangri-La, that it is not a strategy, it is not an initiative, it is a geographical construct, it is not directed against any third country. So I think what he said yesterday at the East Asia Summit is basically taking this forward. Whatever has been spoken to till now, how do you do something on the ground? And I think there were 2 or 3 concepts here. Number one was safety and security of the Indo-Pacific region. That, of course, is very, very important. Number 2 is in terms of sustainably utilizing the resources maritime resources of the region. And in that context, he said that we will have partnerships with countries that are interested basically to have joint projects, whether it is in terms of using the marine resources, whether it is in areas of disaster management, and whether it is in terms of security, and to launch it forward. He also announced that there is going to be a conference in Chennai on maritime security in the Indo-Pacific in early next year. So I think this is very, very important because, and this is all the members of the East Asian states will be invited to that. And I think this is very important because although we have been having discussions on the Indo-Pacific for all this time, different countries have come out with their own versions, with their own understanding. So as far as India is concerned, we say from the eastern shores of Africa to the western shores of America. But as far as the United States and Australia, their geographical construct is a little different. ASEAN came up with its own construct in June of this year, after having spoken about it and deliberated on it for 1.5 years. And for them also, the centrality of ASEAN and also the use of the instruments that have already been constructed. They don't want to construct any fresh instruments. So the platforms that are already there. So the fact that we are using the EAS platform to take forward this concept of maritime security in the Indo-Pacific, I think this is very important, and that will, in my view, find a resonance as far as the ASEAN is concerned and as far as the others are concerned. And basically, I think it is for India to take a leadership role in the region, because people had started talking about that both the Indo-Pacific and also another construct, the Quad, which is separate but very closely related.
Right.
And that, it is only speaking, it's only talking. There is hardly any forward movement on the ground. So I think this initiative that has been taken by Prime Minister Modi, what he has mentioned, I think it is really putting something on the ground, something concrete, rather than just talking about, what it represents, what it means,
Sure.
that it should be, freedom of navigation and all that sort of things.
Okay, all right. I'll come to Quad in just a bit. But, before that, the Ambassador, Vijit Singh, was talking about how none of this is directed at a third party, really, and no one should be concerned or worried about what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. But clearly, everyone's thinking about China.
No, that certainly is true. China is the sort of big gorilla in the room that no one's talking about. Let me just begin by saying that the fact that we're now talking about the Indo-Pacific Initiative, which is a little bit different from just the Indo-Pacific as being an idea or a vision, is in itself a significant thing. Up until now, the understanding was that India does talk a lot about the idea, has a sort of a conciliatory model in terms of wanting stakeholdership for all states in the region, etc., but it does very little on the ground. And this has raised some hopes that we will come up with measures in which we can implement a certain model of security in the region. The ambassador spoke about the different versions of the Indo-Pacific, and it's important to understand that if you have to think about a concrete model that you can apply on the ground, you have to have a sense of what are the different versions that different countries espouse or they subscribe to. And I would say that essentially there are three. Prime Minister Modi has been on message this time in saying that his vision is actually one of inclusive stakeholdership. And I would agree again with the ambassador when he says that this is not about baiting China, it's not about keeping China out. I think in Shangri-La, Prime Minister Modi was very clear in which by bringing out that this was not an exclusive club, and that we would at some future date be happy to work with all states, including China and perhaps even Russia. So I think that's the Indian model, and there's a great acceptance. The idea of this resonates in the region. If you contrast this with the American model, which is the more sort of confrontational model, which is about bringing China's excesses in the South China Sea, the fact that it pursues these predatory policies, the predatory economic practices in the way that it's implementing its Belt and Road Initiative. Our model stands in contrast to that model, and again, it's clear to all of us that there are big takers for our model, but very few would agree with the way that America characterizes it. I think from our point of view, it's very important to know what the third model is really about. The third model, the ASEAN model, is what I have sort of coined as, or I characterize as the consociational model. It's about sharing, power and sharing responsibilities in the commons with all states, with China. So if you look at the manner in which the Southeast Asian countries have come out with their own outlook, the Indo-Pacific outlook, and the way they have characterized their dealings with China, it becomes very clear that they are opposed to any form of a rules-based order that implicates China or that baits China, that accuses China of any unfair practices. And I sense that there is going to be an unwillingness among ASEAN states to go with any model, whether it's an Indian model or a US model, that contains certain elements of balancing China in the maritime littorals. Even though, and counterintuitively, ASEAN is at the receiving end of China's excesses in the South China Sea. And you would think that they would actually support a model like this. It's very interesting that just about 15 days back, there was China holds the Xinjiang Forum, and it's the equivalent of their Shangri-La. And they invite a number of countries. A number of Southeast Asian countries, Malaysia, Singapore, including the Deputy Secretary General of the ASEAN, expressed great skepticism about the idea of the Indo-Pacific. Even though we talk about centrality, we say that we're placing ASEAN front and center because they are the primary stakeholders in the region. But the fact is that all of them actually are saying that the reason why we came out with an outlook is not because we want to offer our full-throated support to the idea, but because we have to manage our own differences on the Indo-Pacific. Malaysia's, I think it was their deputy foreign minister who made a statement saying that the Indo-Pacific model mischaracterizes our collective identity. We were happy with the Asia-Pacific, or for that matter, even with Asia. So, whilst we are talking about this big initiative, we should not be too hopeful that the ASEAN a bunch is going to bandwagon with us and say that we are willing to support this. Firstly, it's not about containing China. And China, as just brought out, is the big gorilla, 800-pound gorilla in the room. If you can't balance China, no initiative is going to really work. Second, there is ASEAN skepticism. And third, and most importantly, the fact that we just rejected RCEP 24 hours ago. And the ASEAN is going to take this with a big pinch of salt. They are going to think that this is some kind of a sweetener to what we are doing with them. This balances the narrative on the way we are dealing with ASEAN. So I think, whilst all of us are getting quite excited about the fact that Prime Minister Modi has made this initiative, I'm not so sure some of these countries are really taking this proposal very seriously, because even in the past, we've come out with our own vision, our own ideas, but we don't quite have the resources to match our strategy with our deeds, and therefore this adds a little bit of a wrinkle to the proceedings or to the narrative on the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. All right. So, Devi Prasad, let me bring you in here now. So, for long, the US has been asking India to play a bigger role in this particular region. That's why it was renamed Indo-Pacific as well by the Americans. So, is this, or can we see this as India being more assertive in the region?
See, that is what probably Washington wants you to do. And this is not new. I think it's almost a decade, 2006, 2007, this whole thing started with first, if you notice, the US Department of Defense in particular, continuing to maintain a very good profile of Indian Navy as one of the most professional navies that it is. And then talk of how Indian assets in the region could be increasingly used. And then came the Obama's rebalancing towards Asia. And if you look at it, the first use of Indo-Pacific probably figured in Hillary Clinton's speech, and then formally adopted by the Trump administration. And it took almost 2018 is when the Asia-Pacific Command was changed to, instead of the Pacific Command, was called Indo-Pacific Command, which is a very big deal for the way Department of Defense, there was a lot of resistance to that, because they wanted to show it more of something with the sinews. India has been cautious, very, very, because within the own Indian establishment, there are 2 points of view. We go down the economic construct path, try and build up our economy. But remember all this, just about last week or so, last month there was something, where this was this on Indo-Pacific, it came out very clearly. Some of these countries which are in the Pacific region, especially Australia and New Zealand, they maintain that if Indian economy doesn't continue to grow as it did, then the contributory factor for India on this Indo-Pacific recedes. Because you need to have that economic boom and economic buoyancy to sustain this kind of activities if you want to have long legs, many other factors. But that being the case, India is very, I think it's not, we're totally going with to kind of push it that we want to contain China, no, very clearly. And all this has been said many times, not now, even past, as I said, I think the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh once said, India and China, there's enough room for both of them to grow. So I think this is where it is. As I said, the Western powers may want you to look at differently. India has its own viewpoint. So that's where it is.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, we have to safeguard our own interests, and that's going to be the utmost priority as far as the Indian government is concerned. But Ambassador, one more thing that happened in Bangkok was the meeting of the Quad. You know, for many years we saw that it was happening at the JS level and at the junior level. But of late, we've seen that change. It has been taken up a notch. The foreign minister level has met in Bangkok. Why has that changed, do you think? What's the reason behind that?
You know, when the Quad was launched again in November 2017, you know, on the sidelines of the East Asia Summit in Manila in Philippines. At that time, again, it is because, you know, as we've been talking, it is because of the rise of China, the assertiveness of China, particularly in the South China Sea, what people have seen, and, you know, very clear hegemonistic tendencies of China becoming evident. And that is why these four countries got together at junior official level. They had 3-4 meetings. And basically, of course, China was quite concerned and apprehensive about what is being cooked. And it said, not only as far as the Quad is concerned, but even as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, that it is sort of a quasi-military alliance to contain it, to stymie its growth, to you know, keep it boxed in, so to say. Of course, my view and understanding is, you know, China, big country, territory, population, economy, military. I don't think it is a country that can really be contained or boxed in any way. Anyway, this is the way how it was projected. So it continued for some time, and you know what is reported is that India was a reluctant player, reluctant partner, and particularly after the Wuhan summit that took place and the Sochi summit that took place, India was not very keen to sort of, you know, either raise the level or have it become more proactive. But then I think over the last few months, particularly what we have seen after India removed Article 370, partially abrogated Article 370(35)(a, and the response of China, maybe that was one of the reasons why we decided to get it upgraded to the ministerial level on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And there, of course, you know, still everyone is, all the four countries are betting, hedging their bets, because the four countries have not as yet come out with a joint, unified statement. All of them have been coming out with their separate statements, understanding of what has happened. After the New York meeting, India has not come out even with its own version. Again, because basically countries want to hedge. You know, as we were discussing earlier, the raison d'etre of coming into place Indo-Pacific and the Quad is the assertiveness and the hegemony of China. But it is precisely because of that none of the countries really wants to take a very strong or concrete stand against that, because all the countries, Japan, Australia, United States, India, they have very strong linkages with the China of different nature. Japan and Australia, as far as commerce is concerned, the coal exports from Australia to China. As far as India is concerned, both in terms of trade as well as a 4,000-kilometer long unsettled border. So none of the other countries has that problem. And of course, with the United States, it is a little distant from this region. But it also has this US-China trade war, but also about $400 billion trade deficit with. So every one of them has that, and even that is the case as far as the ASEAN countries are concerned.
Right.
I think one thing we need to see about the previous discussion that we are having on the Indo-Pacific is it will be a mistake if we look at ASEAN as a single block. It will have to be sort of, different countries, and that is why initially they were not at all, positive or warming up to this idea. Meaning, if you look at Malaysia, Malaysia has always had a particular, right from the 1990s when Mahathir wanted that East Asia caucus, against the Americans and having a stronger relationship with China. So what Mahathir or his deputies say, that doesn't come as any surprise to me. But I think like our own association, our own partnership, whether it is with Indonesia, whether it is with Vietnam, whether it is with Philippines and some of the other countries, I think we have to take it up in that sense. We will not be able to see all of the whole of ASEAN coming together and applauding the movement of this. But I think some of these bigger countries, if we are able to get them on board,
right.
Countries like Laos and Cambodia will definitely never come with you, nor will Malaysia. But we shouldn't get disheartened by that. But coming to the Quad discussion that we were having, I think it is because of what we have found that China has been insensitive to our core issues. What it did on the 16th of August in the UN Security Council, having an informal meeting, also at the UN Human Rights Council, also at the General Assembly.
Sure.
And the statements that has been making more recently on the 31st of October when the bifurcation of the state was done. So I think all this has led India, notwithstanding the informal summit that we had at Mahabalipuram,
right.
that has led India to send out a clear but a subtle message.
Sure.
And in that context, I think it was upgraded to the ministerial level, who gave directions. And now in yesterday in Bangkok, we had a meeting of the Quad at senior official level.
Right.
And we'll see how it sort of,
transpires and moves
transpires
forward.
and moves forward.
Okay,
yes.
all right. So Abhijit Singh, let's to talk about another aspect. On the sidelines of some of the major summits that took place in Bangkok, there were several other meetings that took place, one with Japan, Shinzo Abe and Prime Minister Modi. There was the meeting that took place with several of the other leaders as well. And the focus well and clearly was the Indo-Pacific, be it with Japan or be it with Vietnam or any of the others. So what kind of support can India really expect from some of these countries? Because Australia has come out openly in support of the Indo-Pacific Initiative. Japan has been talking about the Indo-Pacific a lot and wants to do so many more things with India in the region. So what kind of concrete support can we expect?
Well, all of these countries do support the idea of the Indo-Pacific. And we've seen in the past that they have not hesitated to speak very clearly about what they think is a model of security that both economic and maritime security that works in the region. But that idea of the Indo-Pacific also is in some ways related to the idea of the Quad, as the ambassador very rightly brought out. That whilst India maintains that the Quad and the Indo-Pacific are two completely different concepts and should not be conflated, and that we should look at the Quad as a consultative forum and as the Indo-Pacific as an idea that can bring us all together. And that I suspect we also do because the ASEAN fears that the Quad discourse or the too much of focus on the Quad is going to in some ways dilute their importance in the Indo-Pacific region. That means the Quad then becomes the Indo-Pacific. But the fact of the matter is that these four countries are the real principal players in the Indo-Pacific region. And unless they don't take a hard stand on matters of maritime security, there is very little that can be achieved in terms of achieving a favorable balance of power in the region. I mean, one of the things that is unsaid in all of this essentially the Indo-Pacific is about a favorable balance of power, and as I put it, a favorable balance of anxiety. Meaning that if the Chinese fear that there is a Malacca dilemma, we fear that there is a possibility of China taking over our space in the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean region. So to maintain that balance of anxiety in our favor, we need a balancing arrangement like the Quad. So I, as a maritime analyst, feel that that's important for us to look at both these ideas in conjunction. They might not be quite the same thing, but they support each other. And one of the things that Japan and Australia have been telling us, not so directly, of course, but also in indirect ways, that we have to put the money where the mouth is when it comes to hard maritime security measures and our dealings with the Quad. I think what's happened is that there is a clear Indian hesitation to move ahead on many of the proposals that the Quad is putting forward. One of the things that the ambassador rightly brought out was that we've not signed a joint statement. It's no happenstance, it's no coincidence that it just so happens that we didn't sign one. The fact is that we were unwilling to support many of the proposals that the remaining Quad countries had come up with in the first meeting, and that has continued to be the case. For instance, in the last meeting, if you were to read out the readout that the American Foreign Ministry came out with, there is no mention of a rules-based order.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that whilst all these three countries are willing to support a rules-based order, that particular term is seen as something that baits China by Indian interlocutors. So we've always made the case that we will come up with a separate statement that does not include that term. Now, in the past two meetings at least, there have been no separate statements, so to speak. But the three remaining Quad members have somehow been considerate of India's stand on this matter, and somehow we have managed to come up with a statement that pleases everybody. But we're still hedging, and still hedging in a really big way. I would say that the US, in the way that it comes out, I mean, look at the US's Indo-Pacific strategy report. It comes out with an Indo-Pacific strategy report 3 or 4 months back, in which it brings out concrete developments in terms of maritime security, in terms of maritime governance, in terms of institutions and partnership building, and even human capital, what it's done in terms of connectivity projects. I think what we need to do is that both with regard to the Quad and with regard to the Indo-Pacific, we need concrete measurable areas, concrete measurable terms in which we can actually assess what development has happened, what has been our contribution in hard substantive ways to maritime security. I think the fact that there is so much of rhetoric that surrounds both the Quad and the Indo-Pacific, and these staccato proposals that come from our side every now and then with really no follow-up, means that we want to create the right optics, but we are not wanting to follow up these proposals in a way that can beget the results on the ground.
Okay, follow up and act is what you're suggesting.
Action. I'm saying that there is a clear deficit in terms of action, and that we will see in the future. Now the Prime Minister has made a proposal. The next few months will tell us about what are we willing to implement on the ground with regard to tactical security, also with regard to China and strategic security.
Okay, quick closing comments from all my guests. I've got very little time remaining on the program, so I'm going to ask you to be brief with the best way forward. KV Prasad, starting first with you.
Well, one of the things they also need to look forward to, as people have been talking about, China has talked of a code of conduct in the South China Sea in particular. So that's going to be interesting. We have to wait and see, because 2021 is probably a deadline they have set for themselves, and that is something which needs, because centrality of this whole is the South China Sea and China's approach in that region.
Absolutely.
And of course, way forward for India.
Absolutely. Yeah, Ambassador?
Two very brief points, Frank. The first is that when India will really not be able to play its due role as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned or otherwise, unless it has a strong economy. And now that we have moved out of RCEP, I think it is all the more important that domestically we look at and try to make our economy stronger, more, we are not doing too well. It is our economy is under stress. So how to make it stronger in terms of initiating some of the reforms, whether it is capital reforms, whether it is land, labor, whatever is required. But I think that is what we need to do if we have to stand up against China, and if we have to make a contribution as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. The second point that I want to make is, when this whole issue was brought out as far as Indo-Pacific and Quad, it was also supposed to represent some sort of a challenge to the BRI, to the Belt and Road Initiative, in terms of, that these countries will get together and will put up some projects, some alternative funding and financing on the ground. Nothing of that sort has happened. And I think we really need to sort of, walk the talk and do something on the ground in these countries, so that these countries in ASEAN particularly are able to see that there is value, there is worth in supporting the Indo-Pacific concept and also the Quad
absolutely.
concept.
And Commander Abhijit Singh, close the
I'll
show
also
for us
make just
very
two points
yeah.
briefly. One, first, I would completely agree with the ambassador that connectivity is as important as security, and you cannot privilege one at the cost of the other. And I think that this discussion has been weighted too much in favor of security and connectivity. Even though we talk about connectivity, somehow it hasn't got the importance that it deserves, and that I suspect is because of the fact that we haven't been able to put together the resources.
Right.
And second, more important, is that we have to understand that the principal fault line in the Indo-Pacific is between those that support the rules and those that support the order.
Right.
So, the US, Japan, Australia are all countries that support the rules. They first want a set of rules that all countries will agree with. And China and a couple of other countries, including some in ASEAN, and I would say India is on the fence on this, support the order, which is to say that there are some areas where we will cooperate and other areas there will be no rules. I think first of all, we need to be clear on where we stand. With those that support the rules or with those that support the order.
Absolutely.
And after that, then we can decide on what sort of initiative to follow in the region.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.